Sit tall, turn from your thoracic, turn over your hip, sternum over the knee. Change. Okay, this movement is not so much a stretch, but it's part of a series called lengthening the hamstring. You're going to take your hands down your leg as if you're smoothing the clay down, and then come to the other side and come up. Be sure to move your torso as you go. So there's going to be contact on the mat or the floor where the bottom of your pelvis, the sits bone, and where the hamstring comes into that, the insertion point, or the hamstring comes into that bone. You're going to feel, you can sense movement over that point, that spot in your body as you come down, turn, come up. So it's important that you're rocking your torso over that point. Come down and up. Now reverse, go to the outside and up the inside. All right, let's go to the center. Down the inside, up the outside. Change over, now you're going to go down the outside and come up the inside. It doesn't matter how far you can reach. If you can only come to your knee and come back, that's fine. Come down your lower leg. If you can come down past your foot and come up, that's fine. Doesn't matter how far, just the quality of movement. Now, cross over. And change the pattern. All right, let's return to this motion. Sit tall, come over the knee. Sit tall, align to this leg now. And return to this side now. Sit tall, turn over the knee. Massage your foot. Rub your toes. Uncork your toes, like your toe is a cork and you're gently pulling it out of your foot. Gently pull, uncork. Now turn each toe like a tiny dial, like a little radio dial. Rotate it. See if I can come closer. This one. You're rotating your toe like a little dial. So on my little toe, I'm rotating it. The toe is turning relative to the stable point of the foot. So we did uncork, and now rotating. Sometimes I call it safecracking, like you're turning the dial very carefully. Now piano keys. Take the metatarsals, 4 in one hand, 1 in the other, and move them together. Like piano keys rubbing up against each other. But you're going to have space in between these bones. Now grab 2 with one hand and 3 with the other. Now grab 3 with one hand and 2 with the other. So you're not wiggling your toes, you're grabbing the metatarsals, the bones connected to your toes. And then 4 and 1. And now return. So 1 and 4, 2 and 3, 3 and 2, 4 and 1. Okay, let's go through the series on the other side. First, massage. Uncork. Safecracking, rotation. Piano keys. Okay, so today our focus is hanmi and position relative to a line. Is there a problem? I hear somebody. Okay. So hanmi position, for those who might hear the recording and are new, you want your feet not at a 90-degree angle. Half would be 45. So in between 45 and 90, there's 60 degrees. Look for 60 degrees and then send your foot back. think I'm going to change the angle of the camera a little bit. So the arch or instep part of my foot is lined up with the heel, sending that back along the line. I have my heel and my second toe are establishing a line, and the back foot goes back along that same line, and I set the back foot at 60 degrees. Now you can take a small or narrow hanmi, you can take a deep or wide hanmi. Shift your weight forward, shift your weight back. Make sure the knee tracks within the frame of your foot, from heel to toes, but not past your toes. Heel to forefoot, heel to forefoot. How is it in the back? You want the knee still to track in the frame of the foot. So here, I still want the knee to track in the frame of the foot. Don't let it fall in this way. Don't let it fall to the outside, but it tracks in the frame of the foot, even as you shift your weight forward and back. Push off the back foot to drive your pelvis, the weight of your body forward. Push off the front foot to drive your pelvis, your torso, the weight of your body to the back foot. Feel that heaviness in the back foot. Feel the lightness in the front foot. And then shift your weight again. Make sure you bend your knees as you go so that your pelvis rides parallel to the mat. Let's look at it this direction. So don't come up and down. Don't come up and down. Try to find that suspension system in your ankle, knee, hip, so that you ride parallel to the mat. Let's look at it this direction. 60 degrees. Forward and back. Back leg almost feels like a pump to drive you forward. Okay. As you shift your weight forward and back, hone in on the midpoint of that motion. A spot where you feel like your weight is 50-50. I could neither pick up my front foot without falling, I couldn't pick up my back foot without falling. It's 50-50, even Steven, and from there, pivot to the other side. Check out your weight. Is it forward or back? A lot of times after we pivot, we make an adjustment and end up maybe further back. Shift your weight forward and back. Find that midpoint, 50-50, and then pivot. Check it out. Can you feel, can you sense whether your weight is still 50-50? Try to pick up your front foot. Try to pick up your back foot. If you fall immediately, then you know that you have a certain amount of weight in it. If you pick up your front foot and it's very light, it's easy to be on one foot, then you know your weight is in the back. So sometimes we feel like we're in 50-50, but then we find out that our perception is a little bit off from reality. So this is one of the ways you can kind of check yourself. Is my weight really 50-50? And then pivot. Imagine the shape of a corkscrew or a book press. Both feet are connected to the ground, and anatomically it's not exactly the same, but it's useful to think of this central core that you're rotating and you're stabilizing from the ground. So look for that central core of your body, head over pelvis, the spine, kind of defining that line, and rotate. Now, where do you pivot from? Some people pivot on their heels. Some people pivot one way on one foot and a different way on the other foot. So look for the ball of the foot, this configuration at the base of the big toe, the first metaphalangeal joint, first MPJ. There's a little structure called the sesamoid that helps us pivot. And in the architecture of the foot, this point is the lowest spot. It naturally falls as the lowest point of the foot. So when you glide your foot, it's easy to make that spot the first part of your foot that touches the ground. Look for the lightness there and how you can pivot on that spot. So take a moment, go ahead and put your weight in the back foot, touch that first metaphalangeal joint and see if you can find a pivot point there. A rough analogy is to put a peg between the big toe and the second toe and imagine pivoting your foot around that point. That kind of gets you in the neighborhood of the right place. And you can even do that physically. Put a peg and rotate your foot around that. But more precisely, look for this spot at the bottom of the first metaphalangeal and pivot around that spot. Now find the calibration between that spot and the rotation in your hip joint so that your knee is carried safely between the 2 points. As I mentioned before, there's an old Chinese saying that when the parents fight, the child suffers. So don't let your knee suffer. Calibrate the pivot at your foot, pivot point there with the rotation in your hip, and carry your knee safely. All right, let's return to hanmi. Shift your weight forward and back. Find the midpoint of that motion. Find that first metaphalangeal joint, that spot at the ball of your foot, and pivot from there. Is your weight still 50-50? Pivot from there. How can you make this movement very clear, clean, and efficient, keeping your knees safe? Let your hips drive the motion now. Can you initiate the movement from here? And know that everything below is going to move relative to the hip motion. Start the motion here. All right, this time, try starting the motion from your front foot and let everything follow. This time, try initiating movement from your back foot. How does that drive through the system? Can you still keep it 50-50? And now return to initiating movement from your center and let everything follow from the hip motion, but in a clear, organized, coordinated way. Someone pushes your hip back and everything goes. All right, this time shift your weight forward. And as you start to shift your weight back, you pivot at the center 50-50 point, and then continue putting your weight in the forward leg. Make sure the knee doesn't go beyond the toes. All right? So your weight's forward, you come to 50-50, that's when you execute the pivot, and you finish with weight forward. Begin, pivot, finish. This way, that way. Okay, let's take a look at pivoting relative to a line. I'm curious to find out whether this blue line I put on the mat actually shows up on the video. If I place my heel and my second toe on that line, my back foot positioned back behind it at that 60-degree angle, now I'm going to step forward, and we're going to look at 3 different ways. You can step forward relative to my own hip here, and then pivot the back foot. I can step forward, stepping directly on the line, and then turn the back foot. I can step forward just over the line, and then finish pivoting that back foot. So we're going from hanmi to hanmi. Feel the difference at these 3 different levels. So one position, you're just bringing your foot in line with your hip, so it's a little bit away from the line. The second iteration, you step right on the line, like you're on a tightrope. The third way, you step a little bit over the line, right? When we're going to execute the pivot relative to these 3 different ways. So first way, come to this position and pivot. Finish on the other side with your weight forward. How does it feel? Can you sense your shikaku angle? Can you sense your weak spot? Then step forward on the tightrope, right in front. Find that pivot point on the first MPJ, your weight 50-50. Finish, weight forward. How's your stability now? And third iteration. Step forward just over the line, just a hair over the line, and pivot, and check out your stability now. Let's try it all on the other side. This time I'm gonna try with my back towards you just so you see a different angle. Go ahead at your own time. First way. Second way. And third way. Now, sometimes in Iaido or in even just walking, there's a situation where you bring your foot relative to your hip. Then as you finish the pivot, you draw the foot, right? Let's look at that situation. I come forward, I pivot and draw this foot around. You might do that naturally. Why is that? Because there's an inherent instability in just staying here. Right here becomes a vulnerability in your balance. So you may step up and feel that you want your hip to bring your foot around. So that's one way of dealing with that. Another one is to actually step a little bit in front of yourself. Now, as I finish my pivot, my foot is just where I need it. That again, this direction. If I step across over the line a little bit, then as I pivot, I'm stable. So when you can make fine changes in your hanmi and how you step and your balance at this very fundamental level, then it really changes the whole organization. It starts to change what's happening up here. Of course, the beginning of this movement lends itself well to boat rowing, right? Just shifting your weight back and forth, a wonderful solo exercise. And so I want to take a moment to go over a few different variations of boat rowing. So one way to think of the boat rowing exercise is that you're actually rowing a boat. And if you have this in your experience, in your background of rowing a boat, then imagine the oar in your hand. And you know that when you're drawing toward, you're shifting to your back foot, if you have that oar in the water, then the angle is going to make a big difference in how much resistance you feel, right? If you put the oar deeply into the water, you're going to have a lot of resistance to pull through. you can change the angle and put just part of the oar into the water. So a different angle to be able to pull through a little more easily. And then when you bring the oar out of the water, you rotate your hands so that the blade of the oar is now parallel to the water as you come forward. And there's no resistance there because it's in the air. Then dip it into the water. Feel that resistance of the water as you draw back, really using your lower body. And then rotate the paddle out, come forward. So this is where we get this kind of position or configuration. Drawing, rotate. All right, so then there's another, really using your imagination is a great gift in your solo practice. It really invigorates it. Anybody who does Iaido, you know very well, imagination. It's a big factor in your training. Something that Boken Sensei writes about as well. Okay, let's look at another way. This is a way that Crane Sensei demonstrates the boat rowing exercise. It's a sense that you are throwing the net out. So the palm is down, the hands finish near the level of your eyes, high, and there's really a sense of your center, your whole body, sending it out. Then turn your arms, palm up, draw into your center here. So you toss the net out and then draw in. Toss. Really a sense of projection. And then draw, palm up, like you're pulling something into your center. Elbows come close to your ribs. So a third way relates to our weapons practice, and that's drawing this big circle in the sagittal plane here. Drawing your hands in, up, out. Into you, up, and out. Drawing a circle. If I show you this way, you can see more clearly. In, up your center line, out. Draw in, up, out. So it's kind of a segue to Saburi, right? Going in, up, out. It's just an exercise. There's lots of different ways to do it. And none of these iterations have we really talked about hip turning, right? It's all about a study and a focus on weight shift and the connection of the foot to the ground. All right. Let's look at, as we get into May, I want to work on the skills needed to practice the kumi tachi. So in preparation for that, let's look at the fishbone exercise. So let me put the Boken down for a moment. If I start with my feet on the line, I'm going to sink down a little bit in my knees, initiate movement from my center, turning the hip to draw the foot forward. In this case, I'm going to place it just to the side of the line and let the hip take my foot back. I'm establishing an angle here. Let's make it 45 degrees. There are many ways to do this exercise and experiment with a very narrow acute angle, or as we get into each no touch, a wider angle, or even go no touch up to a 90-degree angle. Right? But for our purposes today, basic fishbone exercise, step forward, establish 45-degree angle. So you're taking your hip back, look at it this way, step up, turn the hip, bring the foot around. Finish in about a 45-degree angle. Here. Now to get to the other side, turn your hip, let your foot drift across the line, come up and draw your hip back. Make sure the transition happens with your feet, your knees close together, and draw. Let's look at it this way, moving forward. Small step forward and turn the hip. Small step forward, turn the hip. Could be a big step forward and turn the hip, or no step, just coming together and drawing back. So this relates to a Saburi exercise I did last week based on Saito Sensei. Here, just drawing this V shape, or step up. Step up and pull the hip. Now to go backwards, turn the hip, draw the foot across this line. I say drift it across the line, just a tad. Step back. And step back. Turning the hip. Don't bring it up to go back. That's staying in one place. You want to create distance. Let the hip take the foot. Hip motion takes the foot. You can pivot on that spot on your foot if you're working on a very narrow angle. Find that pivot point in the foot, step back. When one leg passes the other, you want it to pass close. Watch yourself and see if your knees are far apart. Here, you wouldn't want to do this, right? When you're going back, don't swing your leg out and around. Sink, turn your hip, make sure your knees brush. Your knees brush as you go back. All right. Stepping back. Finish, weight forward. Create the angle. Initiate movement from your center. Turn your hip to move your foot. Turn your hip to move your leg. Coming forward, turn your hip to take a step. Initiate movement with your center. All right, so let's incorporate this into our basic sample. Sorry, that's probably loud. Stepping back, shomanuchi. Make this a very narrow fishbone, so less than 45 degrees now. When I finish my cut, if I imagine dropping a plumb line from the tip of my sword, that plumb line drops right on my reference line. But my body is off the line. Right? Here, here, here. Tip is in line with the line. But the angle of the Boken and the angle of my hanmi are in agreement, just off of that line. Hip. Coming forward, again, turn the hip, raise, place your weight, turn your hip, cut with the hip turn. Cut with your hip. Cut as your turn. Make sure your back foot is connected at the moment that you would cut through. Five minutes. So you can incorporate this idea into your basic movements, your shigogiri, stepping up and cutting, pivoting. There's a lot of turning and pivoting, yeah? Look for that point under your foot. Where do you pivot from? What's the timing relative to your hip? In the 8-count Suburi, you have lots of opportunities to reestablish hanmi. All right, they're stepping forward. Number 2, stepping forward. There's number 3. You have turning, and where is this foot going to land now? Back here, here, here. Where do you want it to be? So the reference line is good practice. You're introducing a constraint to move your body around that relative external reference point of a line. And then, of course, as we get into encounters, that's going to give you kind of the tools and the infrastructure to then work with a line of attack more effectively. So as a musician, you know, doing your scales and working on your fingering exercises is not making beautiful music, but it's developing the skill set, developing your chops to be able to play and perform good music when the time comes. So we have an opportunity to really work on your infrastructure, work on that skill set, so then when we practice our forms with another person, all of that can come forward and be applied. Okay, I'm going to bow out and turn off the recording, and then I'm happy to do a little question and answer and comments. So let's bow out. Thank you very much. どうもありがとうございました。